All right, well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. We're so happy to have you here for the second Connect on the Quest of the school year. My name is Hope Gribble. I am the Green Schools Manager for the Missouri Gateway Green Building Council, and I manage the Green Schools Quest program with help from our volunteer-based Green Schools Committee. Our incredible committee members have worked to plan this and the remainder of events in our series for the year, each of which aligns with our focus of the year, which is climate action. About half of today's registrants are actively engaged in Green Schools Quest projects, and the other half are members of our organization and community that are just interested in the topic, feeling prepared and empowered to teach climate change. We'd love for each of you to get to know each other and invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat. If you are participating as a school or mentor in the Green Schools Quest this year, we invite you to share a little bit about where you're at with your project, what your focus is, what you're working on right now, so we can see how things are going. The chat is also where you can insert comments, questions, and resources throughout today's event. We will work to address any questions that come up throughout the session, and we will also be sending out a link to this recording as well as any resources that come up. And if there are any questions that are not addressed, we can do that via email afterwards. We are going to kick things off with brief project updates from two schools. And I always love hearing kind of mid-year, mid-project, how things are going. And I'm very excited to turn the floor over to one of our mentors, Angelina O'Donnell. Angelina is the Sustainability Program and Events Specialist at Missouri Botanical Gardens Earthway Center. And this year she is co-mentoring at Goach Intermediate in the Afton School District. So Angelina, I'll turn it over to you to just share a little bit about how things are going.
Yeah, that sounds great. Hello, everyone. So like Hope said, I'm Angelina. This is my second year being a Green Schools Quest mentor. Last year, my mentorship got cut a little short. My lead ended up going to a different school, had a new AmeriCorps assignment. So I'm really excited to be back into it and getting the full experience from beginning to end. So also, as Hope mentioned, right now I'm at Goach Intermediate. And let's see here, hold on, I'm pulling up my notes. My internet was being a little weird. Can everyone still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. 1 second. So yeah, as I said, working with Goach, I'm working with instructors Nikki and Jennifer, 4th and 5th grade teachers, and they are working really kind of getting back into the basics of just proper single stream recycling procedures. So my colleague Joyce Carell are kind of tag teaming and mentoring them. And we met up with them and we're kind of able to establish what was already going right. Basically, we kind of got a little bit of numbers. There are 75 different recycling bins throughout their school. So, and just wanting to understand and get the message across of what should go into our single stream recycling. So yeah, so after identifying kind of also what the main contaminants were, that being mostly lots of food wrappers, lots of paper towels, lots of tissues. They kind of gave them a few resources and they were able to kind of begin the process of educating their entire school what the proper procedures were for single stream recycling and what belongs in that stream recycling collection. So let's see. So after Joyce and I met with them, the 4th grade class kind of spearheaded a recycling presentation to the whole school and just giving the correct way of how to recycle. And then they also met with all the classes and students just to see how everyone was doing. And their main goal is to have also their custodians stop putting clear trash bags into their recycle bins after winter break. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that's been going. Also, they've been taking part in the plastic film contest. So they were able, within that contest, collecting different types of specific plastic, stretchy plastic that can be recycled in a special way, but not through single stream recycling, as we all know, super big contaminant and really causes havoc within the recycling structures. So they were able to move forward with that campaign, making posters, collection boxes for the bags, and I know that's going really well. So I'm going to be meeting with them next week, just kind of giving an idea of what happens to materials once they reach the recycling facility, kind of what happens to those items, what can they become depending on the types of materials they are, and just kind of brushing up and testing their skill level and seeing if they know exactly what all is included in single stream recycling. So I'm looking forward to meeting up with them and seeing what's going on. They've been doing really well.
That's so great. Thanks for sharing that update, Angelina, and for, investing this time working with the school. Huge shout out to all of the mentors who are engaging with their schools this year. Paul Epps from Central High School in Springfield, Missouri was going to be sharing out as well, but it doesn't look like he's joined. Paul, are you here? Just want to make sure you're not under another name, possibly. All right. I would invite, I know Anne Cummings and Ben Winkler are both participating this year. I don't know if either of you would like to kind of on the fly just share a few words about how things are going with your projects, but you are invited to do so if you'd like.
Hello.
Sure. Oh, go ahead, Ben.
Are you sure? All right, I'll go first. I'll make it quick. Hi, I'm Ben Winkler. This is my, I believe, 3rd year mentoring. And it's going interestingly this year. I was paired with a school who has like a whole green team, and honestly, they don't need me. So then Hope hooked me up with another school, and we got a really fun plan right before they went on their winter break. And now I'm waiting to hear back from them after that. But we are going to do, it's a high school, and they're hoping to do some a worm bin. But what's cool is they're trying to get in communication with the elementary schools and middle schools in their district. And so I'm going to work with the high schoolers to kind of teach them what that is and everything, and supply them with the bins. And then they're going to go and they're actually going to teach it to the younger students and kind of get that to be, their school helping the district with learning about compost and vermicompost and all that. So hopefully I hear back from them. It's definitely been interesting, but I think it won't take too long to get it started. And then hopefully we can have something to present in March.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, it can kind of ebb and flow. And I actually, this was not intentional, but both Angelina's organization and Ben's do provide services to all schools as far as sustainability education, and especially related to waste diversion. So really good resources for all of the mentors and schools on the call today to consider. And we have about 4 minutes left before our next segment. And if you'd like to share anything about the work that's happening at Brittany Woods this year.
Sure. This is our 2nd year really actively participating in the quest. Our 1st year, I signed up and things it just got away from us. So we're really happy to be participating, and I'm sharing that in case there's anybody who's new, who's trying to feel their way, because the concept of the ebb and flow with the Green Schools Quest really is true. Our quest project relates to equity, and we have a predominantly lower income school. 85% of the kids that we serve, probably 90, are African American here in U City. they belong to families where older people are combating diabetes, not all of the kids, but a lot of them, diabetes, hypertension, a lot of issues like that. And so what we're doing is we're trying to work with our food service to create meal plans that are healthier for our students. Right now, a typical breakfast includes cereal bars, like actual like Trix cereal bars, and Pop-Tarts. And so we started taking a look at hunger globally. Locally, we asked the question, is all food the same? We watched the movie Super Size Me to prepare. We've had a meeting with the chef from our food service, and we're talking about not just taking a look at the commodity food that they receive from the government to see how maybe that could be cooked differently or prepared, but how we could help them guide their purchasing so that there's less waste and so that the food isn't so processed that kids are receiving, because we have many kids. Well, we are 100% for reduced lunch. So this includes breakfast and lunch. And then for some kids, it's food that we send home. We're also working on getting our garden certified so that we can provide fresh produce directly to our food service. And the food service is also talking about implementing something they do at other schools, but have never done here, where they have a chef's kitchen once a month where small groups of kids, they'll actually use our sustainability classroom where the chef will prepare something fresh in front of the kids and give them recipes, let them taste them, have lunch with them, so that hopefully those meal ideas will go home with kids. So that's what we're working on. You never know what you're going to get from Brittany Woods.
Well, you're addressing so many important needs, and we really appreciate you sharing out and the work that you're doing. The food that is provided through the school directly through the breakfast and lunch programs, I think in many cases could use a lot of work as far as moving away from processed foods with sugar. So thank you for doing that work within your district. All right. Well, we are now going to shift our focus a bit and welcome our featured presenter for this evening. So our focus tonight is really climate change education. And we are joined by Seth Spencer, who serves as Teach Climate Network Coordinator for Climate Generation, which is, I believe, based out of Minnesota. Yes?
Yep.
And Seth is going to share some resources that Climate Generation offers for formal and non-formal K-12 educators and youth. So I'll turn the floor over to you and let you take it away.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Hope. Just getting all my screens set up here, but then I'll jump in. Yeah, well, good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for joining tonight. If you are able, would love for folks to turn on cameras, as I do hope that the presentation will be interactive, but definitely understand there's a lot going on at this time of the evening. As I move forward, I will kind of try to keep an eye on the chat function. So if you have any questions or you say, Seth, that is not true, that's not going to ever work at my school or my project, definitely throw it in there. But yeah, I'm going to try to share some resources, some ideas that could possibly support educators, students learning more about climate change and actually taking climate change action. But I'm going to go ahead and jump in. As Hope said, my name is Seth Spencer, and I'm the Teach Climate Network Coordinator for Climate Generation. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm joining you today from the traditional and contemporary lands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe in Apple Valley, Minnesota. Climate Generation was founded about 15 years ago now by National Geographic polar explorer Will Steger, who is a lifelong science educator, environmentalist, and eyewitness to climate change through his 50 years of polar exploration. And after many of his expeditions, he would come back and really think about who are the change makers in our communities. And he was like, it's got to be teachers, got to be educators. And so he founded this organization to really support educators and communities to understand what's happening around the climate crisis, but of course, really take action and move things forward. I do share our vision for how we think we're going to help support stopping human-caused climate change, but also just taking climate action. And we think there are three major issues, and one is overcoming science, or specifically climate change disinformation. Of course, centering anti-racism and systemic equity, because without climate justice, we'll never actually achieve true climate change solutions. And then personalizing and localizing climate change action. As Hope said, Climate Generation is based in Minnesota, and for probably the first 10 years of our organization's life, we really focused on Minnesota and the Midwest. Over the last 6 years or so, we've really expanded to support educators and communities nationally. And so definitely work with educators in Missouri and throughout the United States and Canada even. So I'm going to ask you all to participate and throw quick observation in the chat. What comes to mind when you think of climate change? So I'll give you like 30 seconds. It's really quick. What comes to mind when you think of climate change? I'm seeing denial, a warming planet, fear, overwhelming. Wait for just one more. Large fluctuations in temperature and weather, accelerating death. Yeah. And so already in those responses, I'm seeing negative, fear, overwhelming, can't do anything about it. And I mention that because that is what students are hearing. And so while it doesn't seem like something I ever thought was going to happen in my lifetime, climate anxiety, climate grief are definitely things that students are dealing with. But also I think it's important for us. I am getting up there. I'm no longer in my 20s or early 30s. I have seen climate change becoming a thing. I've seen changes. Students are not seeing these changes. This is their life. And so that's something that I have to think about, because I talk about, oh yeah, you just look back 20 years ago, and no, they are just seeing extreme weather events, droughts, fires, all of these things is just a normal part of their life. So I do throw this super awesome graphic up there because we've known about the greenhouse effect and greenhouse gases since the 1800s. Scientists were measuring infrared absorption and emissions from gases and continue to study the effects for like the last 160 years. And I mention that because we often think about there being this debate around climate change. And I kind of stop and say there's not a debate around climate change happening. What there possibly can be a debate about, and where I talk with both adults and students, is about what are the causes of climate change. All of the data we're seeing is that our climate is going through a change. And yes, there have been many, many changes, but even if you want to argue that it's not humans, we still need to be thinking about what we could do and definitely adapting to these changes. So I throw this graphic up there, and if you've never used this before, Climate Central is an awesome organization that puts amazing graphics around climate change data out there to just really show that as we're seeing this rise in global temperatures over the last 140 years, we're definitely seeing that follow the same pattern around carbon dioxide emissions. And so if you have folks that talk about climate denial, either in your class, your school, or parents, it's always good to kind of start with that same, like, here's what the data is showing. Yeah, thanks, Hope. So I'm going to also share, why do I spend my time on this? Because one thing that I think any educator kind of knows is that sharing a little bit about your personal life or why something is important to you does help students buy in, because if something is going to be important to them, it usually impacts them directly. So I am originally from Minnesota, but I've lived kind of all over the US, and most recently spent about 5 years in coastal Alaska, in Homer, Alaska. And so was seeing, even in that 5 years, was seeing and hearing about all the changes that were happening to coastal communities. This is just one of about 1,500 glaciers in Alaska that has receded. This is Portage Glacier just outside of Anchorage, Alaska. And you can really see this, it's hard to tell, but this glacier has receded about 10 miles in the last 90 years or so. And bringing it back to the Midwest, we of course have extreme flooding events. Now, I'm not going to make you guess what this weird seal picture is, but this is a very famous seal in Minnesota. About 10 years ago in Duluth, Minnesota, there was a once in 100-year flood, and flooded so bad that the local zoo flooded, and the seal got out of its enclosure and was swimming around the streets. The polar bear also got out, but luckily stayed within the zoo. But I mention that because Duluth has now had 2 more once in 100-year flood events just in the last decade. And so I think in the 90s, when I was in middle and high school, really hearing about climate change and global warming, it was something that was happening somewhere else. The polar bears were going to die, coastal erosion, things like that, things that were happening very far away from where I lived. So really thinking about how does it impact the Midwest? What do those climate change impacts and solutions really look like, I think is important for our students and community members to really understand. So here you'll see some of those after effects of that flood. So again, going back to some of that data, the 10 hottest global years on record have all been in the last 15 years. And so it's been incredibly hot. It's been record-breaking hot. You can see just in the summer of 2021, how many cities were breaking high temperature records, especially the Pacific Northwest. You may remember this almost a year and a half ago now, but Seattle and Portland were getting above 100 degrees, incredibly abnormal for weeks on end. It's also incredibly dry. Yes, in the Midwest, we are expected to probably get more precipitation as climate change increases. But in the Southwest and West, extreme drought, of course, tying to fires. And then we have incredible changes like this bomb cyclone that is hitting California right now. No worries, Anne. I think it's also important to really think about, usually climate change has been taught in the science classroom. I think it's important for us to think about, and I'll talk about this in just a second, about how we can talk about climate change beyond that science classroom. And of course, green clubs and things like that are excellent avenues, but really think about how would it be talked about, or how would it impact students' lives beyond that science classroom. And one thing that I often start with is how much money climate change is going to be costing us in the future, how it does really impact our economy. So looking at billion-dollar weather events just from this past year. In 2022, we had 15 different billion-dollar extreme weather or climate disasters. I think this is the third most ever. In 2021, there were 22 billion-dollar weather events. And now a little trivia. Does anybody have a guess? Which state has had the most billion-dollar weather events? I think it's 41 billion-dollar weather events. It's really high. It's much higher than any other state. Any guesses? Angelina says California. Anne says California. Janine, Florida, Texas. Okay. Eileen is correct. It is Texas, because they get hurricanes, they get tornadoes, ice, snow, all that fun stuff in Texas. And there is, I think it's 2, but definitely one state that has never had a billion-dollar weather event. And that's good old Alaska. I think partly they do not have the infrastructure to have a billion-dollar weather disaster. So just kind of something to think about of how it is going to be impacting and is impacting beyond just temperature, things like that. So now really thinking about, we've talked about how it shows up in our science classroom. We of course can look at chemistry, we can look at biology of how it's impacting flora and fauna, but really thinking about how it is impacting every part of our lives. And many of the solutions are definitely going to have to be looked at beyond the science classroom. So as Hope said, I do hope to share some of the resources that Climate Generation personally has created, or some of our amazing partners has created. And if you're not familiar with Project Drawdown, they're probably one of the international leaders in really thinking about what do true climate solutions look like. And here is just a quick example of probably the 10 most effective ways to get to carbon drawdown. And so things that students will understand: reducing food waste, things that I've already heard you all talking about in your own schools and communities, health and education, plant-rich diets, onshore wind turbines, utility and scale solar. All of these things are at least for us to be thinking about. How do we help our students understand what this new green future might possibly look like? And for the next little bit, I'm going to talk about some of this on different scales, because I think it's important for our students when they're learning about it in the classroom to really think about how could my actions or my community's actions or the government's actions really talk about or strive for true climate change action, but really, as I said, adaptation and resilience, because many of the impacts are already here. And even when we do eventually get to that drawdown, that's my hope, those impacts will still be here. So we do have to be talking about what are those adaptations, whether it be building seawalls or building buildings up higher, or making school infrastructure more reliant on renewable energy. So really just sharing that. So these are all activities that I've done with students. Of course, in elementary and middle, you have to adjust it a little bit, but one that I'm going to challenge you all to think about, and if you're interested, you can go ahead and put in the chat. What is one action you can take at home or with your family to possibly reduce your own emissions, or make your community or home more climate resilient? I'm going to have you think about it. If you want, you can go ahead and throw it in the chat. Tracking food waste at home, composting. Awesome. One that I'm not sure I chose necessarily because of the climate impacts, but I knew that it was gonna be a little healthier. I really reduced. I lived in Wisconsin for a few years, and the amount of red meat that I was eating was a little scary. And so moving to Alaska, I really changed my diet. And then moving back to Minnesota, I rely heavily on venison and salmon. And so that's definitely been a change that's had a positive effect, at least for me, but knowing that those kind of choices are not available for everyone. Yeah, buying local products, less things in general, picking up trash or walks in the neighborhood. And so these are all things that we can ask students to really think about. The challenges, I'll go back, is that students, unfortunately, have very little choice or power on many of these actual impacts. So just want to share this graphic, not to depress anybody, just to be thinking about. So I hear students, and even when I was in school, recycling, that was the way that we were going to get to our end goal of things like upgrading light bulbs and recycling and washing clothes in cold water. And these are all great choices that we can continue to help students understand, like the power of all of that, and really connect back to kind of the science of what is happening around energy and things like that. But you'll see that we're not really getting to that high impact until we're making pretty big choices like eating a plant-based diet. I have not made that choice for my family yet. Still able to get by on poultry and venison and salmon. but really switching to an electric car or going car free. This is something that I've talked a lot about with students here in Minnesota. That's a really challenging one. Most people are not going to be buying a $50,000 at minimum Tesla, or even have the choice. Our public transportation in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area is pretty horrendous for a city of our size. So just thinking about how do we actually connect with students to have them really understand like what actually their real lives look like. Do they have the choice of safely walking to school, biking to school, things like that? Living car free. And I think it's important for students to like having fewer kids. I made the personal choice to have 2 kids, knowing that it's going to have an impact. But just really talking about some of those real powerful solutions. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Anne. So thinking on a slightly larger scale, how does your community support or hinder your actions as an educator or youth supporter? And so this is another thing I want you to think about. What is something that either the school you work with or the organization you work with is doing really effectively or is supporting you in connecting with students around climate change education? Or what is a barrier? Because I think it's important for us as educators or folks that work with youth to really think about what are some of those barriers. Because in every community it's going to be different, in every state it's going to be different. I did a very quick search right now. This was, I think, last year, but Missouri is getting a C- in climate change education based on state standards. Minnesota is getting a B-, not much better. But there are some states still that even talking or using the words climate change are not allowed within schools, or they'll get pushback. And so I think it's important for us as educators to be realistic of what we can do and what we have to think about some other solutions. So I'll give folks a second to just think about that. I think within these community solutions, something that comes up and something that it sounds like many of your projects or the projects that the mentors work on can kind of fit in are green careers. And our organization uses green careers incredibly broadly, anything that supports a green economy, to really think about how do we support students in any subject area to think about what are those possibilities or what is that future going to hold, but also making sure those solutions or even those careers are equitable, but also even support folks in our current economy. Something that in Alaska I often thought about is Alaska is incredibly dependent on the fossil fuel industry. And so how do we even talk about equitable solutions to like a green economy unless we have a solution for folks to make that step away from the fossil fuel industry? And so, yes, I'm going kind of all over the place as far as like solutions, but I think these are things that you can all think about. And then hopefully right at the end, I'll have some further resources that you can kind of go back to if you're like, how do I actually implement some of this into either the classroom or talk about with the students or even like teachers that you work with. So I also think in that community area, really talking about those personal connections. And that's why I kind of started with kind of why I do this work, why I care, because unfortunately, climate change has become a polarized subject or issue. And so usually I haven't ever had like super intense conversations or pushback from students. Could happen, but it's usually possibly from colleagues or administrators or family members. And I've also found that many of those kind of go away if we really start talking about that personal impact of why you think it's important. They might leave the conversation still not having their mind change whatsoever, but usually there's not going to be nearly as much negativity if you talk about why you're worried about things like crops or heat domes in urban areas in your local area. And you want to think about, how do we make our communities, again, resilient or adaptable to what we are seeing as hotter, more humid summers. In Minnesota, less snow and less extreme cold to a lot more ice, where we just had an ice storm today, and more rain in the winter, and how that's going to impact pretty much everything in the environment. I also think it's important for us as educators to be aware of some of the techniques of science denial. Awesome, Hope. Yeah, that's a great resource, the Climate Stories Project, of really hearing from people all over the world on kind of the front lines of those big climate change impacts. For those not familiar, this is the Flick technique from Dr. John Cook. And he really has an awesome resource called Cranky Uncle, which is an app, but he really has a project called Skeptical Science. He really thinks about both why and how science deniers, and specifically climate change deniers, go about constructing their arguments. And you can see here that there's 5 main techniques, things like fake experts. You may have heard of this big study that came out in the late 90s from about 3,000 scientists that all signed saying climate change is a hoax. And when we do a little deeper dive, I think it's 3 of the 3,000 are climatologists, and all the rest are scientists of all different backgrounds that may not have quite the expertise in specifically climatology. Logical fallacies and impossible expectations. A pretty popular one is it's really cold and snowing in February. Climate change must not be real because it's still cold and still super snowy. The snow thing, we definitely, at least all the data that I've read, we probably will get record-breaking snow because the amount of humidity or moisture in our atmosphere is going to increase. So I think Minnesota is on record for one of the snowiest years so far. We'll see if that continues. Cherry picking, and then conspiracy theories. One very popular one that I see a lot on social media is that climatologists or folks doing research are really just doing all of this to support or give money to the global elite, folks that have bought into wind farms and things like that. And so just important for our students to see that too, because the amount of misinformation or disinformation that is out there on Facebook, not that students are using that a lot, but Twitter, and then of course TikTok. So really thinking about, as I showed you that graphic of some of those personal choices we can make as individuals, there's some power to that. It starts to build as communities. We're making those big changes of maybe your local city making maybe a climate resolution or some changes to where you're getting your energy, but really that's that state and national level. So what can we do as communities or statewide to create better solutions? And then for the next little bit, I do want to share some of those opportunities. And one is I'll just share an example of one. It may not be the best fit. The Youth Environmental Activists is a part of Climate Generation. And it's youth from around the state of Minnesota that comes together and really thinks about what are actual climate actions that they can take. And a big one that they often do is connect with our state legislature to write bills around either climate change education or climate justice. This one, Minnesota really works within just the state of Minnesota, but there's definitely a lot of organizations around the US that work on statewide levels or national levels to support youth, because that's I think the biggest challenge as an adult is I can say, let's make all these huge changes, but both the action and then also the result is probably not going to impact me. It's going to impact students or even my kids that are quite young. And to really think about what does that future look like, that hopefully it's not just super depressing and we're all, I heard a great thing that we hear about how things are going to be really bad in 50 years. And it's quite possible that they will be. But one thing is that civilization is not like going to just go away in the next 50 years. we're just going to have to adapt possibly a crazy amount. And what that looks like and who is left behind is probably the scary part. And so I always think about like, how do we support students in thinking possibly of the joy in making big changes as community members or as a group, and what some of that powerful or positive outlook could actually be. And want to share a little bit about some of those resources. One is, as Hope mentioned, I do work with our Teach Climate Network, which is about 8,000 educators from around the United States that we support through professional development opportunities, whether that be monthly workshops. We put out monthly newsletters and resources, and that culminates in something called the Summer Institute for Climate Change Education that I'll share in just a second. You can see we're spread out throughout the United States. North Dakota is the bane of my existence. Not sure quite what's going on there, but one of the opportunities is if you are on Twitter, tomorrow we have our Teach Climate Chat with two awesome climate justice leaders, really talking about how do students or communities or schools incorporate climate justice so that we are thinking of equitable solutions and that we're not leaving behind folks that are on the front line. I always think about a great example somebody mentioned is that hurricanes kind of impact everybody in places that they hit in Florida and Texas and in the Carolinas, but the way they impact are incredibly different. If you're able to relocate or buy a new house, yeah, it sucked, but you'll probably be okay. It's the folks that are still there and still reacting to all that are the folks that we really need to be supporting and thinking about those solutions. Next week, we have one of those professional development workshops, really thinking about how do we make sure that we are highlighting and supporting those folks that are on the front line. And one of the front lines, there are many, but one of the front lines are Pacific Island communities and things like sea level rise. And so we've got two awesome educators from Rethinking Schools and Zen Education Project that are going to be sharing, and that will be on Thursday, January 19th. And then, as I mentioned, I do want to just share very briefly about our Summer Institute for Climate Change Education, which is a 3-day Summer Institute, usually held in July. We're now in our 17th year. And we work with anywhere from 250 to 300 educators across North America to really jump in and understand how do we take this incredibly complex subject around climate change and bring it into schools. Just to give you an idea of where folks in the past have come from, this was last year, so pretty spread out. These are some of our awesome presenters. We have usually about 60 presenters sharing around climate change education best practices, around climate justice, things like youth activism. And then part of the reason I'm telling you all this is, of course, if you want to come as an attendee or a participant, but also due to the COVID pandemic, we really changed the way that we ran our institute. We used to have it in person just in Minnesota. And we were like, okay, we got to move this virtual, we got to go national, and we have to do this in partnership. And so here you'll see just a few of our partners over the last couple of years. And I show you this to really think about like, okay, Climate Generation's goal is to work with educators across North America, but we are not going to do that alone. We need to be doing that in partnership with folks that are working on that local level. And so always looking for opportunities to partner or support with you all that are doing some of that direct education. And whether that be just highlighting your work, whether that be sharing your message with a larger audience, possibly even having you present to our teacher network. These are all possible opportunities. Our Summer Institute planning is just getting started, but this is our current kind of partner organizations. So we've got some already awesome partnerships set up, but always looking to chat about future collaborations. And do want to share, I'll go ahead right at the end and throw in a link to this presentation, and in the notes are all the links to everything. But if you're not familiar with these three organizations, of course, I think the Climate Generation puts out some great resources, but the Clean Network just has some amazing lesson plans and resources. Subject to Climate is a newer organization that's also really sharing high-level resources and lesson plans, curriculums, things like that. And then NOAA has actually got some just really great kind of like Climate Change 101 and graphics and things for students. So I think all of those are really great resources. And then, of course, doing my little plug for interacting with Climate Generation in the future, all great ways to do so. And then, of course, I will stop talking and open it up for any questions, and I'll go ahead and put that link to the presentation in the chat. But yeah, I just want to say thanks for connecting with me tonight, and definitely want to connect with folks in the future. So I'll go ahead and put my email address in the chat, and then also we'll throw a link to the presentation.
Thanks so much, Seth.
Yeah.
We've been hearing a lot from educators that they would like more information, just even on Climate Change 101 and basic, you know, knowledge. They'd like to grow their basic knowledge and as well as strategies for integrating these into the classroom. I know we've got a real mixed group on the call today. Some have been working in climate change for many years and others are new to the subject. But it's really one of the things that resonated with me from what you shared, of course, highlighting the joy and possibilities and making big change, and that there are a lot of solutions that are currently in action. But starting with me and going to we, you know, thinking about how we can start at home, I think is helpful for students, and then really though being sure to make that connection to talk about the integration of the community and then in policy as well. But what other questions are there out there or comments?
And I'll just share quickly that it can seem like a very overwhelming subject to even start that conversation, just because it can be like the science is complex or can be complex, and that of course there's unfortunately some political tension, but just having that conversation of like, what are students' questions? How can they be engaged? And how can, as Hope said, they go from kind of the me to we, like this, we're not going to get to any of those solutions on our own. And so really thinking about how do we build that collective knowledge of like, this is real, this is happening, how do we adapt, but also that collective power. Yeah. And I think I definitely agree. There's a great note in here of making it really place-based, because climate change actions and impacts, actions, and solutions are so varied, and that I still feel like, unfortunately, a lot of the media and everything, or just like whether it be Hollywood, is definitely that it's like a coastal issue, it's an Arctic or Antarctic issue. It's not really impacting, especially the Midwest. But we are, especially as you go a little south, places like Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama are going to have some of the most extreme weather changes, extreme heat, all of that. So it's definitely going to be impacting us, impacting crops and all that. Okay. Any other questions?
Feel free to unmute yourself or enter anything into the chat. Give everyone just a minute here. All right, well, we are kind of sandwiched between two other Connect on the Quests that really integrate well with this topic of climate change education. Last month, or I guess it was November, that we visited about climate change communications. And I'll be sure to send a link to that recording out to everyone too, because as I was listening tonight, I was thinking about how some of the strategies that were shared in November regarding having positive and effective communications can be some tips for doing so. And then next month on February 8th, we are going to be welcoming Sarah Ray. She's the author of A Field Guide to Climate Anxiety and chair and professor of environmental studies at Cal Poly Humboldt. And she's really a national expert on the topic. When I asked around, her name kept coming up. We're really excited that she's going to tune in with us virtually to share some of the research she's been doing and tips that she can share when we think about climate anxiety, something that came up tonight as well. So I'm going to drop a link to that event, and we welcome you to attend. And also, I would also extend an invitation if you're here in St. Louis to join us for our annual State of the Council, which will be on January 30th from 5 to 7:30 p.m. at the new Jack C. Taylor Visitor Center at the Missouri Botanical Garden. And we will have all of our committees there with representatives to talk to you about the great work that's going on, including our Green Schools Committee. So I'm dropping links to those events right now. And thank you so much for being here tonight. Have a good week. Thank you, Seth.